Fill your summer with the sun-kissed sweetness of Amigos Refreshers. There's strawberry acai, blueberry dragon fruit, and mango passion fruit, each a tropical delight. So skip the hot coffee and amp up your day with the plant-based natural caffeine and fruity flavor fusions in an Amigos Refresher. These cool thirst quenchers are just $3.99, or there's a mega 32-ounce size for $4.99. Recharge with the bold, fresh flavor of an energizing refresher at Amigos.
You love podcasts, the stories, the laughs, the unexpected turns. But when this episode ends, the silence starts. Not anymore. Audiobooks.com turns that silence into your next great adventure. With over 450,000 titles, from bestsellers to hidden gems, your love for listening just found its new best friend. And because you already know the joy of audio, we're giving you 3 free audiobooks to start your journey. Imagine your favorite podcast, now with unlimited episodes. That's audiobooks.com. Keep the story going. Sign up for your free trial at audiobooks.com/podcastfree today. Because for podcast lovers like you, the end of an episode is just the beginning. That's audiobooks.com/podcastfree.
Welcome to All About Agatha, the podcast dedicated to reading and ranking every single mystery novel written by the Queen of Crime, Dame Agatha Christie. I am Kemper Donovan, and welcome to an interview episode. It is the end of the year. We are ending things with a bang with one of my favorite contemporary mystery authors. That would be Maureen Johnson. Let's just get to the interview because it's so much fun, and I will tell you everything you need to know about her, and we will just get into it, and there's no reason to delay. I'm so excited to be speaking with Maureen Johnson today. Maureen is the best-selling author of many young adult novels, including the Blue Envelope series, the Scarlet series, and the Stevie Bell mysteries. Surprise, surprise, it's the mysteries we're going to be talking about a whole heck of a lot in just a moment. She's also done collaborative work such as Let It Snow with Lauren Miracle and John Green. I think I've heard of him before, as well as several works in the Shadowhunter universe with Cassandra Clare. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, BuzzFeed, and The Guardian, among many other places, and she has also served as a scriptwriter for EA Games. And since this is a podcast, after all, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Maureen has her own recurring role on Welcome to Night Vale, which is officially one of the coolest things ever, as well as her own conversational podcast, Says Who? With a question mark, which I'm going to call Unhinged in the very best of ways. It's very, very fun. In short, Maureen is very busy, which is why I am so grateful she took the time to be here today for this interview. Welcome, Maureen.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be back at All About Agatha. Both you and Catherine were conversation partner hosts for a book release. So I'm very happy to be back.
Thank you, Maureen. It's wonderful to have you on. I know Catherine was a big fan of yours as well. Very sad she can't be here and part of this conversation, but she is here in spirit. I also just have to note at the outset that my mom's name is Maureen, and it's not a name. Well, it's not a name you hear all that often. So it's very strange for me to say Maureen, especially aloud, and not be referring to my mom. I just had to throw that out there.
I have family members that can't pronounce my name.
Really?
Yeah, my grandfather always called me Maureen. And I had many jobs where no one knew what Maureen was as a name. And so I answered to a lot of things. I used to answer to Miriam a lot. I was like, okay, that sounds about right. But also Maureen Johnson is the name of a character from Rent.
Yep.
So that's a lot of my life. You know, Rent heads, I see you, I hear you. But at a certain point, I have to be like, I got to tap out. Like, I'm not her. Don't be mad at me. I didn't cheat. I didn't do anything.
Well, I also actually do have a fun fact about the name Maureen. So when my husband and I were naming our oldest child, who's now 6, or I at least was very zealous about the name game. And I read this baby name book from cover to cover. And that is not how baby name books are meant to be read. I mean, they're meant to be dipped into like, oh, what about this name? Or you think of a name and then you read about it. But I read it cover to cover, A to Z. And each name, they would track its popularity over the course of the last 100 years, like in a little line graph. And Maureen was one of the most pronounced line graphs. There is a big old peak in the middle of the 20th century due to a famous Maureen who inspired a lot of people. Do you have any? Can you guess who
Maureen
that is?
O'Hara?
Yes. So
Was
Maureen
it the
O'Hara.
1940s?
Exactly. Like late 1940s, early 50s, there was a spike in Maureens. My mom was part of that spike. So that's why there were a fair amount of Maureens from back then, but it's probably even a little bit rarer among your age group, actually. So
it's pretty rare. And my mom is she always acted like she was born in 1900. Like my mom is always a bit of a throwback. So that she gave me some sort of 1940s baby name it's the least surprising thing ever. But I mean, I always liked the name. It's just no one knew how to spell it. And when you wanted to get like a little license plate or something as a kid, they never had my name. Like no one ever had a Maureen.
Oh no, I think it's a beautiful name and very Irish. It's a very, very beautiful Irish name.
My husband's English. He's English. His father is Scottish. And my Scottish father-in-law is like, it's a good Scottish name, Maureen. So
interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're claiming it too.
Oh yeah. So my father-in-law is Scottish, very proudly so. But because he was in the Royal Navy, he speaks with a received English accent. They all change their accent. There's certain professions where they change their accent, but he is Scottish. But when you talk to him, you would not think he was Scottish because he speaks with a received English accent. So,
well, all this talk about English, Scottish, Irish, and the Isles is actually not irrelevant to the mystery that we will be discussing, because Not My Mom Maureen's newest novel is called 9 Liars. It just came out 3 days ago, so it is hot off the presses and available for purchase. For that reason, I will not be spoiling anything major in this book on this episode, so feel free to continue listening and then to run out and buy Maureen's book when our conversation is done. I highly recommend it. So it's the latest installment in the Stevie Bell mysteries, which started with the novel Truly Devious. And I actually came to Truly Devious by way of a personal recommendation from a reader friend of mine whose recommendations I always listen to. And Truly Devious was billed to me as a young adult spin on Agatha Christie. And I'm happy to say that it very much made good on that bill. It paid that bill in full and then some, because the mysteries in this series are very much puzzle mysteries. They have clues which the reader can solve. And as I often do on this podcast, Maureen, I'm not going to force you to summarize your book. I am actually going to give it my best go and do an overview of the series. Is that okay?
Oh, God, I love you so much.
Yeah, that's the response I always get. This is me ingratiating myself. I've learned that just by doing this, it's just the relief, the sheer relief of,
not just me.
To talk about my book. Everyone, no one wants to summarize it, ever.
Oh my God, I feel so good.
All right, so I'm just going to give everyone a little context here for this conversation. Truly Devious and all the books that follow it center on Stevie Bell, who is a teenage girl who very much wants to be a detective. She's devoured all the same content many of you listening to this podcast have probably devoured: all the classic mysteries, the contemporary mysteries, the true crime shows, the records of old Victorian murder trials, police reports she probably found on some sketchy subreddit thread. You name it, she's read it, obsessed over it. And at the beginning of Truly Devious, she's just begun attending this fancy boarding school in Vermont, which is in the northeast of the United States. In case you're not familiar, it's very cold there. And this school is called Ellingham, and it's the sort of place where special kids who are gifted or driven, or more likely both, can create their own course load and pursue whatever it is that excites them. And Stevie's chosen to go to Ellingham because there is a famous murder and disappearance that took place at the school all the way back in the 1930s. And she's determined to solve this famous unsolved mystery. So that's why she goes to the school. So how's that for a fresh way into a young adult boarding school novel, right? Just really, really brilliant way in. I was hooked from basically page 1 of Truly Devious. And Stevie does, of course, solve this mystery over the course of the first 3 books in the series. She does that with the help of a ragtag group of friends she acquires at Ellingham. They're all very fleshed out characters, as well as one boy for whom she has lots and lots of romantic feelings. And then in the 4th book of the series, Stevie solves another murder, this one from the 1970s. That's a standalone. And then in the 5th book, which is another standalone, and that is the one that is out now, 9 Liars, she solves yet another murder mystery. And this one is from the 1990s. So first of all, Maureen, is that a fair overview of the Stevie Bell mysteries? I don't want to be mischaracterizing anything.
Can I bring you with me?
Well, I suppose to start off then, one thing that became very obvious to me upon summarizing your books in that shockingly cursory fashion is that all the murder mysteries in the Stevie Bell series are murders in retrospect. They're murders that took place many years earlier. And this is, of course, very Christie-esque, especially in the latter portion of Christie's career when she became almost preoccupied by the past. But she did it in some of her most well-known works, Murder on the Orient Express, Five Little Pigs, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm curious if this murder in retrospect aspect to the series was intentional on your part.
Yes, it was absolutely intentional. Usually in the books, in the case of Truly Devious, and actually in all of them, they are always tied into a present. Something always goes wrong in the present as well. That the past and the present always kind of interact. And for a start, I think doing those period cases is interesting to me. And it's better to write about because I think a lot of, how do I put it? Things are kind of more reductive now. Like we swab and then we run it through the database. The past was a giant mess. The past was, oh, there's a crime scene. Get in here. Come on in. Get in. Everybody touch it. Touch it. Did you touch Jeff, did you sit on that? Sit on that. Pick that up. You like that? You see those cigarette butts? Take those home. Just take those with you. Just dump those in the trash. Smoke one of them.
Try to smoke it.
Smoke that. What do you think that is? What do you think that is? Just then sweep it away. Get rid of it. Let's get rid of it. Hose it down. After you touch it, make sure to hose it down. So the Truly Devious cases, I'm not going to say inspired by or based on, but it has loose echoes of the Lindbergh kidnapping. And many of you will have read about the Lindbergh kidnapping, but the investigation was really like, get in here, take some evidence, lick it and take it home and have all your family members touch it. It was just, the scene was taken apart.
Yeah.
And that kind of continues. So you can I'm trying to build a time period and a mood and a story and also destroy a lot of evidence. And it makes it more solvable because the stuff you get, Stevie can't solve a case she doesn't have a DNA database. She doesn't have a lab. She has documents, pictures, people's accounts, and physical objects and places. It's all stuff that if you like a puzzle mystery, you want to see the ripped in half letter, the window that's partially open, sit the accounts that everybody gives next to each other and look from each one to see if anything is different or what stands out. So it makes it document based or physical based or object based solving. So for the crime.
It's taking the forensics and putting it back into that past, which is so productive of the kinds of puzzle mysteries that we like to read without setting the whole book just in the past. And making it, here's something set in the 1950s or something like that. You're able to sort of have your cake and eat it too. It makes it
practically solvable in a practical way solvable because, first of all, in a lot of these cases, no one's looking into them anymore. They're just kind of out there because there is stuff. I had to make a plausible way that this high school student could actually fit pieces together in a logical way. I mean, it's still a story, but there's a way that if you look for stuff and look for documents and ask people what they saw, that you can, and dig around in the actual locations, you can find things out.
Well, and it's also funny, given that the central mystery keeps on creeping closer and closer to the present day. You started in the 30s, then the 70s, now the 90s. And as Stevie also grows older and has more autonomy and agency as someone who, is presumably getting out of the high school years and into something approaching a professional life, do you have plans to bring the mysteries into the present day at any point?
Well, it'll slide back again into the past, and then it will come forward into the present because there are two more.
You have two more planned past Nine Liars.
Yes,
that's very exciting. Could you potentially do even more than that, or is that like two at minimum right now? Past
two at minimum. They're definitely those two are definitely happening.
Oh, that's very exciting. Okay.
The charts are being assembled. There's a lot of charts.
With the string, do you do the string with the tacks?
I do it more like a chart form. So I have kind of columns and rows of information and a lot of scattered, but there are a lot. I like a Post-it.
So a little bit more organized than Carrie Matheson on Homeland. We're not quite in that territory.
That was a big wall. It's a big wall. I like a document. You know what I mean? Like if you were like, you have to search through all these documents for the clue. I'm like, well, you've just given me the greatest day of my life.
Well, it's funny. I actually love your answer to why you're setting stuff in the past, because I think that it's ultimately a very, not a very different reason, but a somewhat different reason from what Christie was doing. And I think it's part of the reason why these murders in retrospect are actually fairly different from Christie's. And I'm cribbing this actually from Ruth Ware, because I had Ruth Ware on the podcast earlier this past year for her book, The It Girl, which actually has a lot of similarities to Nine Liars. And that is a massive compliment to both books, both of which I love.
Oh, thank you.
And she made the excellent point that Christie never actually traveled back in time to the present day of the past murder whenever it was being investigated. And it's true, because for her, it was almost like the act of looking back was the significant aspect of the exercise of the murder in retrospect. And making that connection actually between The It Girl and Nine Liars, they're both about a close-knit group of Oxbridge friends who lose one of their own. It's two of their own. Actually, in your case, you have two murder victims among your group of uni friends. Tracking these friends who in the present day are still coming to terms with that loss and its reverberations. And that, of course, only gets more complicated when it becomes clear that one of them must have actually been a murderer. I remember when I was talking to Ruth about her version of this story that I asked her, well, why did you choose to write this story about a group of Oxford friends since you didn't attend Oxford yourself? And I feel duty bound to ask you a similar question, because I think the question is even a little bit more stark in your case, since you are an American, obviously. Why did you, as an American who did not attend Cambridge, as far as I know, why did you choose to set your past murder in England and among a group of Cambridge students?
The time I did attend University of England, it was in Bristol. So no, I'm not in Cambridge for a number of reasons. Lifelong obsession with all things English, especially music and comedy. And there is a very, very strong comedy tradition that comes specifically out of Cambridge University, and in the form of the Footlights Club. The Footlights Club is basically an engine that spits out not every single, because they have so many, but it just spits out comedians that are famous, that make a lot of famous things. Monty Python comes out of there. Well, partially, half of them come out of there. John Cleese and Graham Chapman and Eric Idle come out of there. But everybody from, say, Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Emma Thompson, there's a very, very long list. And this idea of the Cambridge Footlights type group has always been of interest to me. All of those performers that came out of it. So I always had a lot of interest into it. This is like, I kept joking that this movie is the evil version of Peter's Friends, which was a movie I was obsessed with when I was in college. Whenever I was in a bad mood, I would watch Peter's Friends, which is that group of people. It's Stephen Fry, Hugh Laurie, Emma Thompson, Rita Rudner, who is American. But just that group of people having a big reunion at a manor owned by one of them. Nobody gets murdered. So I needed a group. I needed a comedy. I needed a really strong base location. Also, very handily, my husband went to Cambridge. So, I've been there several times. It was enough that I know the place, but certainly I could tap my husband for very particular information, because it's not one college, it's colleges. You go to a college within a larger university. My husband went to one called Magdalen. It's spelled Magdalene, but it's said Magdalen. It's very frustrating. Samuel Pepys's library is there, so they just have that to hang out in. They have a big formal dining hall that looks like the Hogwarts dining hall. It's sort of based on that. Like, that's where he went to school. And I'm like, my husband there's a lot of me tapping my husband for information, because the more we'll get into it, the more we find out that my husband came from this sort of fairy tale background that I was able to get a lot of information from. But that is the long version, the comedy background, Footlights, and my husband.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because it reads as though you did go to Cambridge. It feels real. The first Agatha Christie conference that Catherine and I attended happened to be at Cambridge, actually. So I was like, this is recognizable. Like there's a verisimilitude there that I think is quite impressive. So well done, Maureen's husband.
Well,
and Maureen.
Mostly he talks about the fact that the River Cam is full of shopping trolleys and Weil's disease. Like he's like, it's just, people get drunk and they fall in and it's full of Weil's disease. And then you hit your head on a trolley. So that matters in this book because I needed certain things.
That does matter. And the comedy, I mean, it's interesting that you also highlighted the fact that this is a comedy troupe, because I would say that one aspect of your work that has a lot in common with Christie is not just the fact that you craft puzzle mysteries, but it's the fact that your mysteries, your books are very, very funny. There's a lot of wry situational humor that's scattered throughout, and otherwise fairly dark story about a double axe murder. I mean, that is what we have here in this.
That is what we have here.
But then we have, and I'm just going to read out one quote here. For example, this is Stevie Bell, our detective protagonist, getting out of a cab when she arrives in London. Stevie had been gripping a 10-pound note in a sweaty hand for the last half hour of the trip, and she presented it to the driver before he left. She was unsure from his look whether this was a lot or a shameful pittance. She decided she would worry about this for days. It would wake her up at night. There's just a lot of that sort of humor of these characters, and especially, and which I really appreciated, and I'm going to have to run down a couple of these. Stevie is an American, and all of her friends at this school at Ellingham Academy who go with her to England are American, and they're coming to England for the first time. So you have a lot of fun with the fish out of water element of Americans experiencing English ways and being a little weirded out by certain things. And there were so many exclamation marks, Maureen, that I put in the margins as a fellow American who has been to England a number of times. I talked about this before. I did an exchange program as well in England, Anglophile that I am. We're all shocked about this. But the one that I so appreciated, because just when I was in England in September, I was trying to explain this to another English person while I was there. And the blank look I got, I was like, wow, you don't have any context for this. You don't know what I'm talking about. And it had to do with fire doors. So this is the quote from your book. You write, to get to their rooms, they had to pass through 3 separate heavy doors that segmented the hallway for no clear reason. Someone's in the pocket of big door, Nate said. Nate is one of Stevie's friends. They love fire doors here, David said. That was another of Stevie's friends. Something to do with the whole city burning down. But it's so true as an American when you go to England and you come to a hotel and you're like, why are there like 8 fire doors in the middle of these hallways that are like blocking off the hallway into segments that don't seem to have any purpose? And they're heavy, and you have a bag and you have to put your bag down and you're going through, and it just seems so weird. And I think it's just become a standard thing there, but it's this tiny little, it's like a micro culture shock.
True story. When I went to Bristol, I didn't get to choose where I lived, but everybody else did, but I didn't for some reason. They were like, we just stuck you in this place. And they purchased an old hotel that had like 11 rooms or suites, and they turned it into like 100 in the way that only English places can. I had the smallest room in this place, but this place was a puzzle. Hallways that bent and turned and doorways everywhere. I overheard some of the people that ran the building talking. They didn't know I was in my room. They're like, yeah, some of these rooms, they're not big enough to swing a cat in. You couldn't like pull out the chair in my room without, like, you had to make some choices. Like, you can't do both. You can't have a chair out and this drawer 2 inches open. It's just not going to work out. Right. But it felt like 500 fire doors in there. At one time, we actually had a fire alarm because we had a kitchen downstairs that kept catching fire because I don't know what they were doing down there, but they kept catching fire. Also, just trying to get out of the building. For the first week, I kept getting lost. I would go down and then I would end up on this little stairwell that went nowhere. Like, it kind of turned and went back up again. And I felt like I was in like an Escher drawing. I'm like, I'm just circling and circling and circling in this building. It's a test. Am I in hell? What's happening with this? And I'm haunted by these fire doors. And eventually I had mono. I had really serious mono when I was there, and I had a high temperature, and I was always trying to get through these fire doors, getting lost in the building and just sweating and just go, So what is happening? I cannot find my way out of this building. God help you if you had been out at the pub. You're just like, you forget it. You just collapse in front of someone's door and just give up at some point because you just cannot find your way through all these fire doors.
I'm glad that you were able to encapsulate that experience in the book. And it's a blink and you miss it. I mean, that's it. I read the whole moment, but it's just, I so appreciated that. And also, just to be clear, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find two Americans who love England and the English people more than we two, as we are lovingly talking about these these foibles of English ways here. But I have to go through two more that you point out in the book. And I have a feeling that many American listeners will also appreciate these. I think you managed to capture the very specific way that English people talk. This is the quote from the book. There was something almost elegant about the way Izzy rambled. Her conversation was a ball rolling on a marble floor, effortless in its unbroken motion, unstoppable without an outside force. And I was like, yes, when I read that, because there is something so different to conversational dialogue in England as opposed to in the States, where, I feel like we Americans are a guttural people. There's a lot of, it gets punctuated. I think American conversational patter is punctuated by a lot of stops and starts in a way that English people just seem to be able to keep it rolling right along. And sometimes you'll stop and be like, wait, what are you saying? Because like, it just keeps on going and it's almost even hard to listen to. And you're like, what, wait, what's happening? But it's so elegant. It's the free flowing elegance that is the foreign quality. And I feel like you capture that as well.
Yeah, they're just talking and you're in it. You're in the web. What's happening? And then suddenly you've been listening and suddenly you're like, I'm on a boat. What happened? They talked to me. What have we done? What's happened? Oh my God. They lulled me into it. But I'm telling you, living with a captive English person, as I do, the spell is broken in a lot of ways. All right. But I do send him to do certain things. For example, one time I left my keys. I live in Manhattan. I left my keys in the mailbox. And then we got a little note on the door that said, I'm done in such and such apartment. I have your keys, bring your ID to get your keys back. And I just said, you go and get them. They'll just give them to you. And he looked at me, he's like, why? And I'm like, trust me, they're just going to give them to you. And he went down, he looked very puzzled, but he went down and he came back and he handed me the keys and he said, how did you know? I said, it's your voice. You could just say stuff and they'll give you things.
It's the accent and the silver-tongued sort of articulate way. It's magical. And then the last one I just have to pull out has to do with differences in roads. This one's pretty obvious. People will be aware of this one, but it was very funny when I read it. Here's what you wrote. This was not a 2-lane road. This was a tiny, tiny, tiny path surrounded by a high wall of greenery that blocked the view. It was a death trap, a meandering thread of madness. It suggested that there was something about English people that she may never understand. And this is Stevie experiencing a truck or a big car passing her cab as they're on their way to this big country estate where the bulk of the mystery happens. And it's just that experience of those teeny tiny little narrow lanes, and especially as a Californian who's used to, terrifying 5-lane highways, I'm just like, how does this work? How are we not in a head-on collision right now? It
is absolute madness. English roads are the most, if you're in England, I'm telling you, we are so those country roads. And I think people from certain cities would be like, yeah, those country roads are nuts.
Right.
It comes up in an episode of Doc Martin, if you've ever seen it. I love Martin Clunes. I love Doc Martin, where he comes from London and he's terrified of the roads in Cornwall. And they make fun of him. They're like, there's bags of room. And he's like, oh, were you kidding me with this road? They are not roads. They are paved generally. Although my husband is from the New Forest. Those roads are not paved. Some of them, they are dirt pitted roads through the forest. They have wild horses on them. And those horses do not care about your business. They will stand in the road and then you just have to kind of wait. And he knows how to deal with these horses. He knows like gestures to make the horses move, but they will stick their head in the car. They will try to steal your sandwiches. They are tough horses. And those roads are bananas. It's crazy, Deborah. What are they doing? What are they doing?
Well, also very well captured, I think, in this book. And that's what's so, in the same way that Christie peppers her murder mysteries with those light moments, those flashes of humor, I just think you do a great job of that throughout this series. It's a large part of why I have enjoyed the books as much as I do. And I think part of what makes them so Christie-ish. And I'm curious, actually, you already mentioned the fact that the Lindbergh baby kidnapping indirectly, kind of loosely inspired some of the events of Truly Devious. And of course, that is the real life case that inspired Agatha Christie for Murder on the Orient Express. So I knew right from the get-go that Murder on the Orient Express was a reference point of yours when I started Truly Devious. I'm curious if there are any other Christies that you found yourself drawing on more than others as you wrote these mysteries, the Stevie Bell mysteries.
Well, I do actually mention Orient Express in this one, and I'm not going to say any more than that, but it comes up. And Nine Liars takes place at a country house. It is a straight up country house mystery. Her mysteries, there's a lot of them to take place in a country house.
Sure.
I found myself thinking about Crooked House a lot, but I don't think it maps exactly, but
it doesn't, but it's probably one of the most powerful of her country house mysteries, actually.
Oh, it absolutely is. Yeah. And I guess there was and then there were non-slight quality to, just the fact that the house itself feels slightly weaponized. But yeah, I'm afraid of saying too much because there is, if you like Agatha Christie, I deliberately dropped a hint, but I don't want to say more than that.
Yes. I know I'm normally a little bit more liberal about spoilers, but since your book just came out, I don't want to spoil it for anyone.
And that's also not telling you very much, but
consider yourself enticed, listeners. We are still in the holiday spirit here, folks. Christmas may have come and gone, but you can still give the gift of the best in British TV with a BritBox gift subscription. There's no reason why such a gift has to be tied to Christmas. It could be a New Year's gift. It could be an any time of the year gift, because it's always a good time to share your love of British mysteries with your friend, your partner, your parent, your sibling, anyone who you think might enjoy the superior mystery content that BritBox has to offer, which, let's be honest, is pretty much anyone in your life. This is a chance not just to share your love of Agatha Christie, but your love of critically acclaimed originals like Sherwood, The Responder, Karen Peary. The list just goes on and on. So this year, give the gift of BritBox. Plus, if you buy a gift subscription this holiday season, you could win a 7-day, all-expenses-paid trip to London and the Cotswolds. Or you could visit the set of a BritBox mystery during filming. You could even have the chance to understudy as a dead body on screen in one of these mysteries. I must note that there is no purchase necessary. Visit BritBox.com/oneway for full terms and conditions. That's BritBox.com/oneway to purchase your gift subscription today. Looking at your bibliography, it seems like you started out writing grounded young adult fiction, and then you sort of spread your writerly wings a little bit and began to dabble in sci-fi or even fantasy in the YA space. And then you began to write these YA mysteries, which is where your energies have been focused for the last few years. Did you always plan to write mysteries? Was that always part of the plan, or how did you come to the Stevie Bell mysteries?
I wanted to. When I started writing YA, there was a lot we were told people didn't want to read. Mm-hmm. And it was a smaller field. It was so small when I started. It's huge now, but it was just on the verge of growing. And what I do like about it is that I believe YA readers have the broadest reading tastes of any class of reader. Mm-hmm. Because they will follow genre to genre. Whereas I feel like adult readers, not all, of course, because some people read very broadly, but a lot of adult readers are pretty rigid. They're like, I like books about submarines. Or, I want to, it's kissing on a bridge and you come to town and you open a gingerbread store and, people like what they like.
Yeah.
And you get to move around a lot more. I always wanted to write classic puzzle mysteries, but I think I was afraid to because I liked them. And I was like, well, what if I can't? am I allowed to do the thing I really want to do? And then I was like, well, what if I just did it? Like, what if I straight up just, I didn't know that I just wanted to. I didn't know the world was like ready in the way that it would be for, now we're like Knives Out, Glass Onion. Like people want the puzzle mystery. And I think you and I both know why, because we're in a time of trauma. And that is where the puzzle mystery really comes in, it comes into its own. I mean, there's a very good reason that I think it's back. Not that it ever went away, because people have always enjoyed it.
Right. And I think, and what's interesting is, the fact that you write what I guess could be called a crossover, right? Because it's crossover between YA and mystery. I mean, it's in some ways a risky thing to do, because I think, of course, what can happen is that you end up watering down both genres, right? And then so it's like not quite a YA, not quite a mystery, and it sort of falls in between. And those do exist, those are out there. But
I don't think YA is a genre, though. I think YA is just a classification. There isn't really a YA genre. It just sort of means the age of the protagonist and how it's generally marketed, but it doesn't exist as it has no genre markers. It has no,
right.
It doesn't, there's nothing that makes something YA other than
the age of the protagonist.
The age of the protagonist. And then there are even some things that the age of the protagonist, you would think it would be marked as YA, and yet it's not. So it's really just a marketing classification, to be honest. But yeah, it has no genre markers. So you can have YA that's anything, and it doesn't make the slightest bit of difference that it's YA, which is why we have so many adult readers. YA is so widely read by adults. And also people come up with you, like the people that read me at a certain time a lot of them are still with me.
Right.
It's great.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That actually makes sense. It's not a genre. It's a classification, because the book people always use as an example is To Kill a Mockingbird was not considered YA because there was no such thing as YA when it was published. But of course it's YA. I mean, its protagonist is a child. So, and if To Kill a Mockingbird is YA, I mean, for a lot of people, I think that blows their mind, or they're like, well, no, it's not, because, you're like, why? Because it's classic? Because it's old? Like, of course it's YA.
How old is Scout in that book?
I think I want to say she's 10, between 10 and 12.
That's what I was thinking too. It would be middle grade. That would be classified as middle grade.
Right. That's okay. True. Yeah. True.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. What I picked up on, though, I think when I started reading your books, is that you can tell that you're coming to these mysteries and populating them with these teenage characters who you are fully fleshing out as characters in a way that makes it clear that you're used to writing teenage characters, or you're at least very good at writing teenage characters and making them come to life. And I think it's the first time I've read a mystery series with teenage characters that three-dimensional, quite honestly, because to a certain extent, I think, a lot of mystery readers grew up reading Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys. And I don't want to, I don't want to be negative on Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys, but there is, I think, sometimes a thinness to the characterization in those books. I don't think that's all.
She hits her head a lot.
Exactly. I think that's a fair statement. And that's not what you're doing here. I mean, you're not just taking a puzzle mystery and saying, hey, instead of this being a 25-year-old protagonist, let's just, zap that age down to 15 and pretend it's basically an adult who goes to school. Like these are teenagers who have teenaged insecurities. They have teenaged libidos. They are, which is a different thing. And you can feel that. And I actually have a very specific question I want to ask about it, because I think one of the most interesting choices you made in the series is that Stevie Bell, your amateur detective, she has, I don't want to call it a flaw, but she has an issue, which is that she gets these panic attacks. She essentially has chronic anxiety, and she has it to such a point where she actually takes medication as well. And it's not something that, we just see happen once and then you forget about. I mean, this anxiety is with her throughout the series. And I assume it will always, it will be there throughout the entire series as long as you're writing a book about her. And I was thinking about it in the context of, the quote unquote flawed detective, right? Who has like something, one big problem or something that complicates his or her investigative procedure. And I'm just curious, when you were creating this character, I mean, how that came about, like how you came up with Stevie and placed her as this teenage character within a story populated by other teenagers and made her this detective that I think does fit among the pantheon of, detectives behind her in more adult literature, but is also very much her own creation.
So I laughed when I first wrote YA because I said I wasn't allowed to do anything. I never got out when I was a teenager. I was trapped. I was trapped in a Catholic girls' high school. I wasn't Catholic. I was never allowed to go out. I was always trying to dig an escape tunnel. I was so bored all the time. But it turns out that's pretty good preparation because a lot of teenage stuff is about struggling against all the stuff that's keeping you back. Teenagers are, I think, continually underestimated, and they are passionate about what they do. They tend to be completists in a lot of ways. If they are listening to something, they listen to all of it. They read all of it. They watch all of it. And they notice things. They can smell it a phony. So don't pander because they will know. Mm-hmm. And they're also complete human beings who are dealing with a lot. And if you can writing the last one was written through the pandemic. The last two were written through the pandemic. And just what they've had to go through. They're used to, in America at least, they're drilled for school shootings. They've lived through pandemics and crises and, everything that's happened to us in the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. They've had to be incredibly flexible. They have a lot of knowledge at their fingertips, and they have a lot of interest in things like crime and justice and how we look at that as a whole subject, not just as a bad guys versus good guys, because that doesn't exist. Like literally the concept of how does justice work? How does justice work in America? Does it work fairly? What are we doing exactly? But also true crime or cases from the past. They have a lot more access to read about things than we ever did, just not to look down at teenagers. They are smart. They are passionate, they are energetic, they are human, and a lot of them are anxious because there's a lot of terrible things going on in the world. I made her anxious. I've suffered from anxiety in the past. I had a medical condition that one of the side effects was anxiety. I had real low iron, as it turned out. And I would just have these rolling panic attacks that I would just have to try to work through. And the world is spinning around. I'm like, okay, I guess I'm still doing stuff, but oh, well, I guess the universe is just going to dissolve to a point, huh? That's inconvenient. But I didn't want to make it the center of it. It's just something that's there because that is how it really is for people. People just go about their day with anxiety, depression, all sorts of other issues. And I kind of wanted it in a way to be reassuring, like, look, anxiety is such a jerk. It's just this thing, it's a lot of us have it. And as soon as you know that a lot of us have it, that anxiety attacks end. They always end. Every single one of them. They're just jerks. That's all they are, is jerks. And they're not super smart. They get tipped off by things that make no sense. I remember once when I was really had it badly and I was just looked at a pair of sneakers and I felt a wave come on. And I was like, oh, come on. Come on. I just looked at a pair of sneakers. This thing is so stupid. This thing is pointless. And I always think of it as, if you ever watched the Bugs Bunny cartoons where he's chased around by that big red fluffy monster.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the big red fluffy monster, I forget its name, but it's really stupid.
Yeah.
And so in the end, he tricks the monster and gives the monster manicures. And that's how I think of it. It's just like you're just being followed around by something that's not very smart that you can. And part of what the therapy is like talking that thing down to size so that it can just trundle along with you. And you're like, yeah, I brought this thing with me. It's weird. It follows me around, but okay, whatever. Yeah. And they have a lot of reason to be anxious. So I just wanted it to be in there as, hey, a lot of you have it. A lot of people on medication. Don't worry about it. It's there with you. It's a pain, but it's fine. It's okay. So that was all that was about.
Well, and it strikes me too, because we've talked a lot on this podcast about the marginalized status of Poirot and Miss Marple. They're both marginalized in very different ways, right? Poirot is a foreigner. Miss Marple is one of these quote unquote surplus women post World War I. And that is their power, right? The marginalization is their power because it means that people overlook them, and it means that they can be observers, and it means that people will tell them things that they wouldn't tell someone who was part of the gang, right? And who just seemed to always have the authority of all of society behind him or her. And the fact that these people don't is what gives them their power. And I think you're doing the same thing in the best of ways here, because she's marginalized by virtue of being a teenager. She's marginalized by virtue of being a child, and all children are, because it's tough. Like it's tough being a child, and it means that people don't listen to you, like you said, at all of those things. And Stevie is it's just funny, because I think that if I told someone, or if someone told me honestly, like, oh, there's this series of books and, it features this teenager who's a detective, I'd think to myself, oh, well, this teenage detective must have a really good head on her shoulders, and she must conduct herself in a very adult-like way. And like, yes, she does have a very good head on her shoulders. I mean, she is brilliant. Like, there is that. Your detective has to be brilliant, or else, she's not going to be able to solve it. But she is not like an adult at all. She is a teenager. Like, she is the most teenageriest of teenagers. And I love that you do that. And I think it works, and it makes her a powerful detective. And, even when I get frustrated with her in this last book, there's an ongoing, I won't even call it a will they, won't they, because they do quite a lot, but there's an ongoing romance that she has with a teenaged boy. And in this latest book, I was like, oh my God, with the self-doubt but that's
she's
part
a mess.
Of being that's part of being a teenager. Yeah.
She's bad at relationships because she is in her head a lot. Mm-hmm. And when she gets to thinking about the thing that she's trying to concentrate on, that she's trying to solve or do, she tends to forget her friends too much. Yes. And she does the stuff that we all do. Like, she doesn't do great sometimes. It's one of her problems, where she doesn't know how to balance friendships, relationships with the stuff that's going on inside of her head. And also, teenage relationships are a hot mess. Like, they are just... oh boy, just blood on the field everywhere. What a disaster.
It really fits like a glove. I mean, that's what these books showed me, is that having a truly teenaged detective, amateur detective, of course. This isn't Doogie Howser detective style, but like, having this amateur detective be a teenager really works. And it works within that Christie, that classic puzzle mystery model. And I just want to hit that point, because I think for anyone who's thinking, like, this is, maybe this isn't for me, I would just encourage you to try it, because I think you'll be surprised, actually, by almost like the experiment that you did here with mapping the classic puzzle mystery into a truly fully fleshed out teenaged brain, and then, an environment populated by teenagers. And it also, I think, is so key, by the way, that these books are in a close third person. So we do stay with Stevie, but we're not in a first person inside her head. Thank God. Because I think that would be, which is actually a little bit of a departure from traditional young adult, right? Because traditional young adult is often first person.
There's a lot of first person. I've used it once. I tend not to. For me, it's a tool that applies in some cases. Like, some cases, that's the pen you want to pick up,
right?
And in some cases, not. I tend to like a third person. Just a little side note on the last part. I forget a lot. The Poirot was a refugee. Mm-hmm. He's a refugee from war.
Yep.
So he's not only from Belgium, but he is in England because his country was war torn.
Absolutely.
Something I think they did well in the Poirot series, when they did Styles, they did them all in a weird order. I don't remember when they did Styles, but they didn't do it near the beginning. It was definitely when they had more money.
It was, I think Styles was like it was almost like a standalone episode. I want to say it was in series 3. It wasn't in the first 2. So it was early-ish on, but not in that first run of more happy-go-lucky short stories. And I think they were like, oh, now we're really starting to commit to this, so we need to do that first one. But it's one of my favorites, actually. I love their adaptation of Mysterious Affair Styles.
Yeah, you get to see Hastings. They have him in the room where they show them movies, and he's looking bored, and Poirot is out on this, he's helping some Belgian refugees march and do things and practice their English. I love the jump in the Poirot. And I honestly can't even tell you how many times I've watched the series of Poirot. It's one of those things I'll just put on. I'm like, well, I got to do stuff. I'll just put it on.
Mm-hmm.
There's some that I must have played through, I don't know, 30 times.
Right.
So it's like, it's just on. It's just there. But when they get that exciting jump from the white magnolia walls, where every single apartment is like white walls with one Art Deco sconce. And they're like, here we are in this rich guy's house, and it's stark white with a sconce. And they're like, this is what we could afford. We have this one sconce that we move around, and then we can go get a second sconce for the next show. But this is what we've got to represent. We've got this black lacquer table, and we've got this sconce. Now we're in a rich man's house. When we're in a different person's house, we will remove the sconce. But then the BBC said, it's time to rain money upon you. Then we're on all kinds of locations, and we're just not in the constant white walled.
Right. ITV, but yeah.
Bless their hearts when they came in and they were like, money from the sky. Let's do this. Let's go.
It gets busier, right? Like there's more objects, even in Poirot's flat, which is pretty well rendered from the start, but even his flat gets a little upgrade. It gets spiffed up.
Stuff.
Yeah.
He has like an extra chair, but just the beginning, the absolute, you could just tell, you can almost, I feel like I could sit there and just write a budget, like sconce, 75 pounds, rental of black lacquer table, 100 pounds. Like you could just sort of, how many cars do we have? We can afford 2 car rentals for these 1930s cars. Right. How many cars are we bringing here? But then they're like, all the cars you want. 1,000 cars. Yeah.
I think Peril at N House, which is in one of those first 2 seasons, I think, when they're in the hotel, and it definitely feels like they're in a white room, like they're in a white room, and it's definitely inside, like on a set, and that is very, very apparent. I was going to ask you, how did you come to Christie yourself? I mean, did you come to the books first? Were you watching the Suchet series? A little bit of both?
No, it was the books. The Suchet series came up much later. I picked my first one up probably when I don't know where I got it. I became obsessed with mysteries. I can tell you exactly when. I was 4, because I was given a set of these little children's books. They were kind of condensed classics with illustrations.
Mm-hmm.
And the very first one I was given was The Hound of the Baskervilles. And I opened it up and I read it. And just that first image of Sherlock sitting there, and he sees Watson's reflection, and he knows that he can tell Watson's in the room. I was like, this is for me. So I was 4 when I got that. And I went to a meeting in LA. You're from LA. You're used to fancy LA meetings. I only go out on occasion and have meetings with producers. And I was with this producer, fancy man's got fancy mystery stuff around the office. And I happened to bring this book up, and he's like, I have that book. And he reaches up to his shelf and pulls a copy down.
Oh my God.
This exact book. And he said, it's this one. And I burst into tears because I was so like,
it's like he just pulled a piece of your childhood from the ether and presented it to you.
Every mystery I could get my hands on. Encyclopedia Brown. There is a series, it was called Something Queer. Would have a different implication now, but I'm glad it was out there. It was these 2 girls, and it was a really cool mystery series about these 2 girls. There was Something Queer in the library, Something Queer at I forget, but they were always like Something Queer. About 2 girl detectives, little 1-minute mystery books. But then at some point I got my hands on an Agatha Christie, and that was it. I was done. I spent summers scouting. The first one, I burned through the library. Then I would go to used bookstores and buy as many as I could, and then return them and buy, you know what I mean? Like, like just sort of like, here, can I have my 35 cents back so I can get, another bag full? Or I would save up, the $5 to get the paperback or whatever. So it was always like a big deal when I got another paperback. So by the time I was 13, I was seriously collecting these books. I still have a lot of them that I picked up when I was 13, including some of the used ones. I would buy, got to go to England. I bought the English editions. So I got some of the creepy English editions.
Tom Adams covers. Mm-hmm.
So I was just obsessed. I was absolutely obsessed. I always wanted to, just like a lot of us become, where you're just like, just want to know, I want to solve a case. I want to solve a case. Where's my case? Where's my mystery?
Do you have a favorite, Christy?
No, it depends on my mood. My first fictional crush was Hastings. What? What? I was 13 and I was in love with Hastings. I was in love with that dummy. I would only read the Hastings ones for a while. I was very put out when he was not in them.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, on Hastings. Obviously, then I read And Then There Were None. And then my world was rocked to its core.
Right.
And, rereading a bunch of them, I find that I come back to Evil Under the Sun a lot. And I don't quite know why. There's something about it I really love.
It's actually, I think it's one of the quietly more powerful ones. And it's one that actually a lot of avid Christie fans point to as one of their favorites. Actually, I think a lot of what Christie does so well, she does do in that book. It's one of the novels where understanding the characters solves the mystery, helps to solve the mystery. And that's so pleasing. But then at the same time, it's one of her busy plots where there's a lot of logistics on that island. So there's a lot of scurrying around where you're like, and you have to suspend disbelief slightly where you're like, could that really have been pulled off like that? It all had to work out exactly, but that's fine. We suspend our disbelief like that for a mystery, but that's also pleasing. And I think to have both of those elements and then have it also be kind of a destination, it's like halfway between a domestic mystery of Christie's and one of her roving, travelogue mysteries. It's kind of both, which is also pleasing. It's just, it has a lot going for it.
I've recently started reading Japanese murder mysteries, and they are also, they tend to have maps, footprints, and like sketches of rooms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also a Christie where the map matters. I like a book where the map matters. All of my mysteries have maps, or in this case, they have the layout of the grounds and the layout of the building. I spent more than a week designing the building in my head because I had to read a lot about landscape architecture.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. But just downloading architecture software to try to build this building, because it matters where every single doorway, it matters because certain things matter in terms of the placement of everything in this house, where the doorways are, where the windows are, where the outside access points are, counting every single access point, then designing for things like there would have been servants' areas, there would have been back areas, there would have been what the different layers of the house would have been for. But just drawing that house, I just sat there just like a maniac with my pencils and just erasing and redrawing this over and over again. The Ellingham map matters a lot, and Truly Devious, it matters more and more as it goes on. There's a map in the Box of the Woods that gives you some information. There's information to be had in the map in Nine Liars. They're never just there for decoration. Right. That matters to me. So the fact that that's on that island and you have to know something about that island, you have to pay attention to that island.
Yeah.
In Evil Under the Sun, I like that. I like anything where you have to actually think about where everything is.
Mm-hmm.
Which is insane because my spatial awarenesses, or certain types of spatial awarenesses, poor, but I'm obsessed with maps, obsessed with them. For Truly Devious, I started buying actual old maps of Vermont off of eBay so that I would know really what roads existed in Vermont in 1930. I think I got the map from 1936 or something.
Wow.
So I would know that there was a road where a road needed to be. Otherwise, it would be wrong. I sweat the details a lot. Like, I eventually turned into a maniac.
But you can tell. And that's why I appreciate the fact that these are true puzzle mysteries. And that's something, like you said, recently, especially in the last couple of years, there's been a resurgence in, popular appreciation for puzzle mysteries, and especially across the pond. In England, even more so. I think the puzzle mystery also never really went away in popularity in the same way that it kind of did in the US, where we got very thrillery and people weren't really. Have
you read The Appeal?
No, I haven't read The Appeal.
You guys, hang on to your butts, because there's a book called The Appeal. Then there's another one called The Twyford Code. And then there's a third one that's come out called The Alberton Angels. It's by Janice Hallett, Hallett. Here's what's so great about these. These are mysteries that are sets of documents. So you're presented in the beginning that these are essentially case files of something that has happened. And I could not love it more. It's the true, like, here is the actual package of, it's a novel format, but you have to go in order. But the novel itself is a collection of documents that lead you to the solution. They are absolute 100% pure puzzle mysteries. Right into my veins. They remind me of the Here with the Clues, which were collections. I have them. There were 4 of them. And they came out in the 1930s, and they were by Dennis Wheatley. They are dossiers. It's a big book of case documents, photographs, letters. In one case, they make a full newspaper and stick it in there that you get to open up and look through. There's only the 4 that I'm aware of. Otherwise, I'd have them all. And you can buy them on used bookstores and things like that. And you can actually solve the mystery by looking through all the documents. And then there's a sealed envelope in the back that you cut open to see if you got it right. And then there's additional documents back there. But Janice Haylett has really tapped into something like that, where if you actually read through the documents in the case, that's how you figure it out. It's 100% pure, real puzzle mystery. They are embracing it because there's nothing that makes me angrier than it's kind of that, like, it was this guy, but like kind of for this reason, and you never got to meet him. And this is sort of why it happened.
Right. I mean, there's a fair amount of wiggle room. I mean, and Christie even, I think exhibits that wiggle room. There's a big difference between a traditionally clued Poirot and a traditionally clued Marple. A lot of the Marple clues have to do with human insight as opposed to physical clues. And I'm fine with that. As long as it's like, oh, okay, if I had read those words and made that inference, which I reasonably could have, I would have figured it out. I'm fine. Then I'm fine. And I think she usually stayed within those parameters. Not always, of course, but it's very pleasing. And you mentioned that you've been reading some Japanese mysteries. Are they the Seishi Yokomizo mystery, like the Hanjin murders by any chance?
Yes.
Yes. I don't know if I've talked about that book on this podcast before, but they were fairly recently translated into English, I believe. And but published, the first one was published in 1946. So these are classic puzzle mysteries. And I've only read the first one, but I believe there's at least 1, if not 2 more that have been translated into English since then, because they did quite well. The book is less than 200 pages. It is a neat, tight, solvable puzzle mystery, and I really enjoyed it, actually.
And there's others that are similar, like the Decagon murders. Yeah, they are neat, they're tight, they're puzzles, and they often have a map. And I have noticed there's a lot of footprint work in those, which for some reason my brain scrambles with the footprints. Every time I'm always like, oh no, it's got footprints. Why can't I follow footprints?
I think you're going to have to rise to that challenge and incorporate some footprints, perhaps, into the next Stevie Bell.
Footprints,
one of these two.
I don't know. This whole, like, you can tell, like, somebody crossed this path 3 times. I'm like, how? Or that they stepped back over the same foot. For some reason, just my brain is like, footprints. I appreciated that they have a lot of footprints in Knives Out and trying to step in footprints. And Ryan Johnson, he's come to save us all.
Seriously. Well, I mean, I think we've established that basically our appetite for puzzle mysteries is bottomless, which is why, thank you for 5 drops in the ocean, because these have sated me as long as I've been reading.
Oh, thank you.
And I really do think for something that is kind of in a different, corner. I talk about different corners of the Christie verse, and I think these mysteries, these puzzle mysteries, because they do feature teenage protagonists, are probably mysteries that are a little unfamiliar to a lot of listeners to this podcast who read a ton of mysteries. So I really do encourage you to check out any of these books. And the other thing that I think you do quite well, and this is, of course, an important skill when you're writing a series, is that while I would encourage anyone to start with Truly Devious and read through, starting with book 1 and read the Truly Devious trilogy, and then The Box in the Woods, and then 9 Liars, which just came out. If you would like to just pick up 9 Liars and you haven't read any of the other 4, you will have a wonderful reading experience and not be confused by a single thing.
That's the goal, is very much to develop a standalone detective, because you can read like a Christie, you can pick them up out of order, and you can I would map them more like, I'm putting myself in big shoes here, but Harriet Vane and Lord Peter Wimsey, because they also have a romance, but you can read those books completely out of order and still understand, basically what's going on with them. There's also a lot more adults there's a full cast of adults in Nine Liars. There are many adults in Truly Devious as well. I mean, they are at a school, and schools do, of course, have teachers, and children have parents.
Yeah, I mean, it's a range of ages, but you get to meet all of the liars in the present day. So they all are. It's a big cat. There are a lot of people.
There's a lot of people, and I have to also just compliment you on the fact that, you start with these 9 people in, the flashback chapters of 1995, and it's hard to introduce 9 characters all at once and to be able to make them discrete and disparate enough to keep straight in a reader's head. And you do, because I didn't really have any problems keeping them straight. And even just as a writer, I was like, I need to study this and figure out how Maureen is doing this, because that takes so much skill. It's really hard to do.
I mean, first of all, I killed 2 of them. That way I only had to deal with 7. And so I had 7 that can't come into the present day. This is the first time I've ever done this, and I'm not going to reveal who, but they're all mapped onto actual English actor/comedians. So not exactly, but I had a mental image to say it is so much about English comedy and TV and English culture that I had a very kind of clear voice and mental picture for each one of them. So
okay. So that's your secret. That is so
for this one, which I've never done before. Ever done before. But I was so thinking about some of my favorite. I watch every English panel show, comedy. Like, that's all we ever watch. So it's like it's the one thing I feel like I have an encyclopedic knowledge of, is like, who do we need? Who are our 9 in this theater? Because it is a theater group. It is very much a casting. They each get a role.
It really is the ultimate Anglophile book, or, mystery, I think, in that way, given that you're an American writing this. And I really do have to also mention the fact that there is a whole lot of Britpop in this book, because the inciting incident, the double axe murder, takes place in 1995. So we get a lot of Blur. We get some, I think almost all of them are Blur fans. Suze is the lone Oasis holdout. There is one character who likes Oasis, and of course, never shall the twain meet. This is a true story, but my sister, who was 4 years older than me, she was also much cooler than I was when we were teenagers and kids, but she was obsessed with Blur. Mm-hmm. I refused to listen to much modern music until I became older. So this didn't really happen until a little bit past the 90s. But I, of course, then became a staunch Oasis fan. And Don't Look Back in Anger is actually the song that my husband and I chose to dance to at our wedding. So
I like that one. I am more of a Blur person.
I was just going to say, it's very obvious that you
is it a little bit.
Blur. It is. Yeah, that's fine.
I will say it's pretty easy to say that Julian is mapped physically very closely to Damon Albarn, who in 1995, what a beautiful man. They're just the photographs of him. You're like, how are you even real? But they were snarkier. Damien Hirst directed the video for Country House. It's very... But I feel like the Country House is a song that could be playing throughout a lot of this, as they roll up. But it is just absolutely steeped in Britpop, and Pulp is in there. There's some Pulp.
Oh, I mean, there's a Pulp CD that is very significant to the plot.
Yeah, there's a lot of that sensibility in there. Just, come on. Look, you deserve it. Have some Britpop. It's good for you.
It really is like a magical period of...
It's a big bop. It's a big bop. I wanted to put more Supergrass in there. I love some Supergrass. Look, you'll enjoy it. You'll have a good time with the Britpop.
Well, Maureen, thank you so much for coming on here. But before I let you go, I do have one final question. I never let anyone go until I make them choose Poirot or Marple.
It's Poirot. I mean, this again goes way back. He was my man. Because once I got over my flirtation with Hastings, which I did, then Poirot was always on my mind. I was a high school student whose brain was always, and I'm talking some Peter Ustinov Poirot. Mm-hmm. I didn't even have David Suchet yet to think about.
Right.
I just loved Poirot. I loved him. I
like every 15-year-old girl, just gave her heart to a 65, 70-year-old Belgian man.
Or perhaps a 115-year-old. Yeah, depending on where in his career. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, depending. He's, time is flexible, and I'm down with that. But is that what when you actually calculated it, comes out to about 115?
By Elephants Can Remember, he's approximately 115 years old. Yes. No, that makes sense. That does not surprise me given the course of this conversation. I think when you have that history, there's also just more to hold on to when it comes to Poirot, obviously. So as a Marpleite, I forgive you.
No, I mean, she's delightful, but it's a lifelong thing. He means a lot to me. I love his little round face. And his obsessive ways. Everything is it's very soothing. It's very soothing how tidy everything is. And let me just say something, Kenneth Branagh. Stop it. I don't want your action Poirot. I don't want your romance Poirot. He is not getting on the roof of your train. That mustache is too big. I'm not here for it.
I'm just happy when there's more Poirot in the world, but I understand the ire when it comes to the Kenneth Branagh Poirot.
I mean, come on, what's happening? Once he got on the top of that train, I was like, get me out. I was on a plane when I watched that. I was ready to rip the door off get me out of this plane.
Well, it's more the scream sequence in Death on the Nile toward the end, where it feels like it's ripped right out of the Scream movies. I mean, many people have made that reference, and it's exactly what I thought of as I was watching the movie. I was like, this feels like Scream. Is this just me? What's happening right now?
I can't. How do you take so many good actors and so many weird choices? What are you doing? I appreciate Jennifer Saunders and Dawn French. I'm down, but no.
Then use them.
Yes. What are they even doing?
That was criminal. Happening? I agree. The Saunders and French. I mean, if you have Saunders and French, it was almost like the fake out. The red herring was, we cast Saunders and French in these roles that you're expecting to be comedic, both because it's Saunders and French. And those were two of the best comedic roles in the Ustinov version. And now we're going to fake you out and we're going to actually give them sort of like a dramatic feel-good ending. But no, you're not utilizing them for their brilliance.
It was what in my head I previously called the underused Eddie Izzard trophy, where they would take Eddie Izzard and they would stick him in movies and literally have him on screen for 20 seconds and not have him say anything. And I was like, I need to go burn that place down that just made this. How dare you? How dare you, sir? So I was, like many people, simply confused by Death on the Nile. Simply. But then again, you go back to the Poirot version, which I did as a palate cleanser. Delightful. Yeah, or the Ustinov. I mean, Ustinov. Delightful. Yeah. Absolutely delightful. So go back to that. And with that, there's no need. Kenneth Branagh, you just stop it. Well, let's end on the David Suchet and the delightfulness of him. And seriously, Maureen, thank you so much for coming on and talking about this. If it wasn't clear, I really am a fan of these books, and I really appreciate what you're doing here in the Stevie Bell mystery series. And I'm so happy to hear that there are at least 2 more yet to come. It's very exciting. Thank you for giving us a place to get granular, because I needed to express some of these feelings about Action Poirot. And seriously, I was genuinely upset and offended. So I hope you were able to exercise some demons. It'll help you. A little bit. Yeah. This has been a bit of a therapy, but I think we were all upset, and I think we all need to work. All right, Maureen, thank you so much. Thank you for having me. Thank you again to Maureen Johnson. I hope you all enjoyed that rather relaxed and meandering conversation that we had. I think nonetheless, you could really feel the Christie love there. And it's, the end of the year, keeping things a little light and loose and fun, fancy free. The next episode of this podcast will be dropping in 2023 in 2 weeks' time. And I am actually going to be speaking about some alternate rankings of Agatha Christie's oeuvre. I've got 2 different grids to compare to the grid that we have finally worked up here after 6 years
of close reading and arguing, overwhelmingly between me and my late partner, Catherine Brobeck, of course, but most recently between me and John Curran as well. And I'm really excited to compare those results with the painstaking results curated by others out there in the world. All About Agatha has no monopoly on ranking all 66 of Agatha Christie's novels, after all. And I think it's going to be a really illuminating compare and contrast. So very much looking forward to that episode. We still have some Agatha Christie short story material to cover, lots more people to interview, so many discussions to be had about Agatha Christie and Agatha Christie adjacent matters. Have no fear. This podcast is going strong, chugging right on into 2023. I wish you all a happy new year, and I'll see you soon. Bye.
Fill your summer with the sun-kissed sweetness of Amigos Refreshers. There's strawberry acai, blueberry dragon fruit, and mango passion fruit, each a tropical delight. So skip the hot coffee and amp up your day with the plant-based natural caffeine and fruity flavor fusions in an Amigos Refresher. These cool thirst quenchers are just $3.99, or there's a mega 32-ounce size for $4.99. Recharge with the bold, fresh flavor of an energizing refresher at Amigos.
Whether you're looking to build a website for your business, your hobby, your podcast, or just for fun, Pair Networks is your go-to web hosting partner. Not only do we have the lowest domain price in the industry, starting at just $11, we've got hundreds of stunning website templates to help you stand out from the crowd. You're not a techie? Not a problem. With our easy DIY site builders, you can launch your impressive website without any technical know-how. And when it comes to security and updates, don't worry, we've got you covered. Our 24/7 US-based customer support is the best in the industry. Check out pair.com today to learn more. PAIR.com.